You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. So, here we are, 300 episodes reached, 2 million downloads, and you listening to me. I just want to thank you all for being here and sticking with me in the show over the last 5.5 years. You're the reason we've got this far and we've reached this milestone together. Thank you. What better way then than to celebrate our 300th episode with our good friend Richard Freeman as we cover some of the terrifying real-life incidents included in his latest book, Creatures That Eat People. We've some terrifying stories of sharks, crocodiles, and a particularly unnerving encounter in Japan featuring a bear. But before we give you nightmares, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mysteriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. Thank you to each and every one of you that continues to support me and the show with your contributions. It is greatly appreciated every time. Mysteries and Monsters is across all social media networks. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit the mysteriesandmonsters.com website. Don't forget you can get t-shirts, mugs and stickers through our exclusive merchandise site available on TeePublic, and you can find the link for that in the show notes as well. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you, as always, to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Right then, episode 300. Let's do this. For as long as humans have existed, to some creatures we've always been on their menu. In his brilliant new book, Creatures That Eat People, Richard Freeman delves into some thrilling real-life encounters that remind us of our human fragility. Richard, welcome back to Mysteries and Monsters.
Nice to be here, mate. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastically well. How's yourself, my friend?
Fine. And then before we kick off, I'd just like to point out that I am not responsible for the title of this book. I wanted to call it Beasts That Prey on Man, which is much more lyrical and poetic, but the publishers wanted to use this awful title, Creatures That Eat People, which sounds like it's been made up by a 5-year-old, because it was better for search engines, apparently. So that is nothing to do with me.
Such is the life in the world of publications and literature, Richard.
Yeah. My old mate, Gordon Rutter, I don't know if you've ever had him on the show, he said there's Edinburgh 14 side, Gordon Rutter, he said that a publisher's not satisfied till he's piddled in the brew.
Yes, often there are these things. I've worked for companies in the past, Richard, where they've promoted people to get them out of the way.
Yeah.
So that just kind of has always baffled me as long as in my professional career. I've seen it in more than one company where people have been promoted just out of the way. Get them out of the way. Can't sack them, we'll promote them. Just put them somewhere in a corner and let them play with some spreadsheets or something. So nothing surprises me anymore. I mean, obviously, this is the first of 2 books that you've got coming out as we speak. This is quite unprecedented, I would imagine, for you, Richard. Have you ever had a situation where you've had... Because are they with different publishers, both books as well?
Now, are you talking about volume 2 of this book? Because this book on managing animals has been broken into 2 volumes. And the second volume will be out later in the year or early next year. Or are you talking about The Highest Strangeness?
High Strangeness.
The Highest Strangeness, that's with CSZ Press. That's out now. Creatures That Eat People. That's been out for a few weeks now, but they're different publishers. This is with Mango, so they're totally different publishers. I have had, way back when I first started writing, I had 2 books on dragons published within weeks of each other. I had Dragons More Than a Myth, which was with CSZ Press, and I had Explore Dragons with Heart of Albion, and they were out within weeks of each other. So it was scaling the lily a bit.
Oh, it's strange you mentioned dragons, Richard. I gave a talk last week here in Sheffield to a wonderful group of very like-minded people down at Airy Ferry, which is our local esoteric shop here in my side of Sheffield. Yeah. And obviously we were talking about all kinds of things, and it ended up just being a big discussion about hairy hominids and ABCs, really, Rich. But one of the people there decided to tell me about an experience where they think they encountered a dragon up Snowdonia.
I'd be grateful if you could send me the details on that.
Absolutely. Well, I gave him your details, Richard, so hopefully you should be getting some contact as we speak, my friend.
Mm.
But yes, you were well known in the group I was mentioning. Somebody said that Three Men Searching Monsters is their favourite weird book of all time.
That which is pure fiction.
But they liked it.
Absolute fiction. So what did this guy see up Snowdonia then?
He was on about he could see sort of he said it was a very misty day when he decided to do this hike, and so the cloud was really round him, so he only got the impression of shadows around him. He said, but he could just feel incredible heat, and the stench of sulphur was almost overpowering. And he could just hear what he took to be the sounds of wings beating, Richard. And I just thought, wow. So as soon as he mentioned it, Richard, I just thought, you'd absolutely love that. So I've shared your information with him. So hopefully, if you've not heard anything in a week or so, let me know, and I've got mutual friends, and I'll ask them to give him a nudge.
Well, that's weird, because on the 27th of December last year, 10 people at Waverley Abbey claimed to have seen dragons. 10 people. I interviewed 5 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole episode in this, so I won't go into too much detail, but there was one large one and 2 smaller ones seen, and I interviewed all of these people, and not one of them seemed to exaggerate. I mean, one guy said, I didn't get a good look at it, I only saw the wings, which were like the wings of a huge bat. None of them exaggerated, but the ones that got a decent look, they said these things had bat-like ribbed wings, not the wings of a bird, long tails with the arrowhead at the end, long necks, long heads. They looked black, but if you got them into torchlight, they were silvery coloured. And one of them squatted in a tree, and one of them squatted on the ruins of the abbey. These were the smaller ones, which were about 6 feet long. But there was a much bigger one that was seen flying over some woods and dived down into the woods. And I interviewed these people, and I went there, and some weird stuff happened to me as well. I didn't see a dragon, unfortunately, but some odd stuff happened in that area that night. So it's an ongoing investigation. One of the witnesses sadly passed away now, but it's an ongoing investigation. So I've been collecting dragon sightings from all over the world, and they seem to be rising in number.
Intriguing.
That's a whole different story.
Well, I suppose as well, Richard, I mean, obviously, with your history working with animals over the years, I suppose it's not a surprise, because obviously we've touched on encounters such as this in the new book, and what has occurred around the world on virtually every continent on the planet. And I have to say, the beginning is a wonderful example of this, Richard. So if it's all right with yourself, I'll just read the opening paragraph.
Yes.
That says, in 2021, a skeleton was unearthed in the Sakumo burial site, a prehistoric hunter-gatherer cemetery in Japan's Okayama prefecture. The man was a hunter-gatherer fisherman from the Jomon period. The skeleton was radiocarbon dated to around 1370 to 1010 BC. The bones showed 790 gouges, cuts and punctures, all made whilst the man was still alive, and concentrated mainly on the arms, leg, chest and stomach. University of Oxford researchers J. Alicia White and Rick Schulting concluded that the man had been killed by a shark, either a white shark or a tiger shark, and scans of the bones showed that most of the victim's ribs were fractured and bitten, and his chest cavity and abdomen were probably eviscerated. The wounds were also concentrated on his left hip and leg, and he may have lost his left hand whilst trying to protect his body from the attack. At 3,000 years old, this is the oldest evidence of a shark attack upon a human being. And as soon as I read that, Richard, my jaw hit the floor because I'd never seen anything about this particular discovery. For people to find such a thing shows that even throughout time, wherever we may think, because I think as well, people would not associate shark attacks with Japan either, Richard.
Oh, there are lots of shark attacks around the coast of Japan and in the inland sea. You get great whites off the coast of Japan. And in the southern islands, you get the tiger shark and the bull shark.
Why do you think that is, Richard, that we don't hear about? Because do you think it's one of these things that when we talk about strangeness in the world and we talk about Fortean subjects, often our eyes will always sort of drift towards countries like America, Canada, Australia, essentially English-speaking nations?
Yeah, it's because the language barrier. And if you see in places like the US, it's even worse. When I was in the US news is just about the US. It's virtually never about anything outside of its boundaries. So it's even worse with non-English speaking countries. But there are, in the book, there are shark attacks in Japan. There are stories of attacks in the inland sea. There was a diver that was taken by one. I believe he was fixing some pipes or cables in the inland sea, and a great white nailed him, tore him clean out of his diving suit.
Yes, I remember reading about that particular one because that was a rather disturbing, because I think there was items of his suit left behind, and that was about it, wasn't it, Richard? Yeah,
that was about it. It would have been a big one that got him. And there'd been sightings of one around for some time. The traces of attacks like this go back further, several million years ago. There was a fossil called the Tang Child, and it was Australopithecus africanus, our own ancestor, and had been killed by an eagle. It had been killed by either, I can't remember if it was a crowned eagle or a martial eagle, one of the two. But it got the puncture marks in the skull. And these things feed on a lot of primates. They'll kill monkeys, but killed by 3 million years ago, and we can tell from the marks on the skull. We in the Western world, particularly in England, where there are no big dangerous animals anymore, we seem to think that this is the sort of thing that doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen to us. It's like an abstracted thing. When we read about a crocodile or a shark or a bear or a big cat eating somebody, we have no large predators in this country. We live in a predator-free environment. I'm all for the rewilding of Britain, bringing back the wolf and the brown bear and the lynx and the wolverine and other things as well. But, if you go into some of these places, you will be on the menu. Yeah. Absolutely. You go into some of these places, you're on the menu. I've been stalked by a tiger in Sumatra. When I was searching for the orang pendek, there was, not last time, at the time before, it was the last day of the expedition, and we were at this camp by the side of a lake up in the mountains in the caldera of a extinct volcano called Gunung Chuju. And there was one little trail that came down from the jungle to the beach. And it was raining on the last night, and we built a big fire, and we're all sitting in a pondock, which is a sort of bivouac made out of branches and palm leaves and stuff. And I got this awful feeling of being watched from this little pathway that ran up into the jungle. This terrible feeling of being watched. All the hairs on the back of my head, back of my neck stood up. There's something along that trail. I know there's something watching us. When we broke camp in the morning, we found fresh tiger tracks that hadn't been there the night before. And it had come down, followed us down from the jungle. It stopped, and it hadn't entered the camp because of the fire. And that's not the sort of thing that happens to you. No. Shooting deck.
I suppose, Richard, this is one of those things as well that, as you refer to there, it's not just us. I think anybody that doesn't really have a connection with the outdoors, regardless of which country they live in, I think sometimes they go into places and just presume everything's fine. And I know that the chapter in regards to crocodiles at the beginning and other crocodilian members, I find it astounding that people will just take themselves off into bodies of water in places like Africa and Australia and just presume everything's fine. And do you think this is just this kind of narrow-minded naivety that sometimes occurs where people, like you said, here in the UK, you might stumble across a grumpy badger, or you might have an encounter with a herd of cows, which is probably the most dangerous thing you could meet in this country, or you may have a tough encounter with a herd of deer or somewhat like that. And so these kind of things just are unheard of here. Whereas if you look properly, you can see some of the dangers that the residents of certain countries in Africa take every single day. Just getting fresh water, Richard, is a...
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's out of necessity. They do this out of necessity. They have to do it. They have to, get fresh water to drink. They have to take their animals to drink. But sometimes you hear these stories about people who live in places like Australia and stuff that just go swimming. And there's one story of an angler. And he was near this bridge, and there was a big resident crocodile that lived near there. And the bridge got flooded, I think, twice a day. You could walk over it at certain times, but at other times, because it's a tidal river, the river gets higher, and you can't get over it. You have to wait. And he'd been drinking, and he decided to wade across, so up to his waist, because he wanted to get to the other side of the bridge. And this big croc just came in and took his head clean off his shoulders in front of a load of viewers. And that is just sheer stupidity. Yeah.
It's a strange situation, isn't it? Because I mean, this is the other aspect of this. Obviously, sometimes these countries, the heat can be overpowering, especially in Australia. Neither the sea nor the inland waterways are very safe in certain places. And I think some of the stories you hear about what's happened, I mean, there was that brilliant story that was on the news in this country about those two sisters that were in Mexico, Richard, and they were attacked by a crocodile in an area where they had checked. They said, no, there's no crocodiles here, you're fine. And one got attacked and the other one beat it up to get it off her sister.
Yes, that was an American crocodile. They don't usually attack people. They're less aggressive than the Nile crocodile or the saltwater crocodile. There's only a handful of attacks. But there was another spots of places that things like that have happened in Australia and in Africa as well, where people have gone into bodies of water where they've been told that there were no crocodiles, and they end up getting eaten. Like the girl Isabel Jordan, who she was a German girl, she narrowly missed being killed by the Islamic bombs that were set off in the nightclubs in Bali.
Yes.
She missed being killed, and then she went to Kakadu National Park and she was grabbed and killed by a saltwater crocodile. It's almost as if fate had got it in for her.
I mean, when I was reading that section, this seems to happen more often than it should, Richard, where people survive incredible things or they go through real trauma or escape things, and they end up being somewhere where they consider it to be relatively safe and secure, and it's almost as if, as you refer to there, that their destiny has been fated. They can't escape it, whether, no matter what's supposed to happen, someone has decided that their time on this mortal coil has come to a conclusion, and that case struck me, because to survive such a vicious attack as what occurred in Bali, to then go to Australia to try and recuperate and deal with what's happened and the trauma that she had, and to lose her life simply relaxing, is terrifyingly frightening, really.
And there was another case, a British girl, 18-year-old girl, a gap year student called Amy Nichols in 2002 in Lake Chala in Kenya, and she was told that it was safe to swim. There were no crocodiles here. There were, and she got eaten.
I mean, it makes you wonder, Richard, why these people would suggest that there aren't any crocodiles there, because it's not like crocodiles turn up with a big sign saying we've moved in or anything. They are known for being the king of the ambush attack. Anybody that's watched any nature documentaries over the last 20 years will know that a crocodile can literally be a couple of centimetres under the water, and if it's of a certain...
Yeah, and you won't see it.
...coloration or anything, you've got no idea. And sometimes you see this footage of people, especially in the bayous in the States and places like that, where they'll go out at night and it all looks calm, and then they just shine a light around and all you can see is eyeballs sticking out looking at them, and you're like, how many gators are there?
Yeah, Yeah, and there was another case of there was a woman in, I think it was Florida a few years ago, had been visiting a friend, and I think she'd been drinking, and she saw an alligator in a pool and went over and tried to pet it. And her dying words were, "I won't be doing that again."
Oh, dearie me.
Alligators are a lot less aggressive than crocodiles. So I've kept both of them. And alligators, you treat them with the respect they deserve. They're not really that aggressive. I mean, you wouldn't want to get near a female on a nest or, in the breeding season. But compared to crocodiles, they're relative pussycats. Like a big crocodile, something like a Nile crocodile in Africa, they take down lions, they take down water buffalo, leopards, giraffes, black rhinoceros. Now there's a gigantic crocodile in Lake Tanganyika in Africa. He's called Gustav, and he's somewhere between 20 to 25 feet long and about 60 years old. He's reckoned to have killed about 300 people over the years, and various people have tried to take him down. He's been shot with a machine gun, and all it did was leave a couple of dents in his scales. And he's still at large out there, and one of the park rangers saw him take on and kill a full-grown hippopotamus, tearing its throat out. And the big saltwater crocodiles down in Australia and Asia, they take down tigers, leopards, water buffalo, even sharks. So a human being has got no chance against an animal like this. They've got the most powerful bite of any creature, 3 times more powerful than a great white shark. And it's like their bite is like having a truck fall on you, about 3 tons of pressure per square inch. So if you imagine 3 tons slamming down on you with 60-odd great spike-like teeth, it's good night Gracie.
Absolutely. I mean, Gustav is probably the most famous crocodile in the world that's not a cartoon, I would suggest, Richard. He has such a reputation. And the other aspect of Gustav is that, obviously, in 2019, somebody started making spurious claims saying, oh, well, he's dead. Well, nobody's been able to prove this, have they, Richard?
No, nobody at all. Nobody at all. The Lake Tanganyika is so vast, and it covers different countries, that if Gustav could hide out there for ages and not be seen. Generally, in northeast India, in Orissa, at the beginning of the last century, there was a 53-foot crocodile that had supposed to have been living in the area for 50 years and eating people. And I think it was they finally managed to kill it in 1923, I think, and they shot it with some powerful rifles from a boat and then set fire to the reed beds it was in. But they still got the skull of it in a museum in India. I think there's another one now of the size of 23 feet plus, but thankfully this one isn't any. They get almost a mythical status to them. There's one in New Guinea, in a lagoon in New Guinea, and the local tribes believe it's a spirit that protects them, and they say it's been there once again for about 50 years. It's absolutely enormous, but this one hasn't eaten anybody either, but they think it protects them like the more aggressive crocodiles, and it's probably a big male defending its territory and chasing the other ones out there. So one of the things that I want to do is go around the world through Asia, Africa, and Australasia, New Guinea, places like that, trying to get some of these giant crocodiles on film with aid, try and work out just how big they are, because they get legendary. Also, the famous Ramree Island story from World War II in Burma, where the British troops had corralled some Japanese onto Ramree Island off the coast of Burma, and there's about 1,000 of them, and all but about 20-odd were killed by saltwater crocodiles. And the witnesses at the time said they could hear the hissing and bellowing of the crocodiles and the screaming of the men and gunshots and the spinning when they do the death roll. And I mean, some people have said this is an exaggeration or it never happened, and those people weren't actually there. But there were records of people who saw this at the time. There was one British soldier who saw this at the time and said these things were huge. Some of them were 20 feet long, and there were hundreds of them, and they descended on this island and killed the Japanese. So I'm more inclined to believe someone who was there at the time rather than somebody sitting in an armchair saying this, that, and the other can't actually happen because I know it all.
Absolutely. And I think the thing about crocodilians that also adds to their mystique is their longevity, Richard, because there's a brilliant story in the book about this crocodile in Africa who ends up being called Henry.
Yes.
Who was captured in 1903, and he's still alive, isn't he?
Yeah, well, he was a man-eater, and he was an adult when they captured him. And he's still doing fine. He's on a crocodile farm in South Africa. He's a bit of a celebrity. He's doing absolutely fine, yeah. And he's fathered thousands of other crocodiles. But the one thing in captivity, when you take them into captivity, they don't grow as big as the ones in the wild for some reason. That's when you have them in captivity, because they've got regular food.
Yeah.
And they don't have to hunt. But they get bigger. So mammals and things generally get bigger in captivity. But reptiles, all the biggest ones, have been wild-caught specimens, and I've no idea why that is.
So is the Nile crocodile the grandfather of the crocodilian family then? Are they the ones that live the longest, Richard? And if so, why do they live longer than, say, the American crocodile or the saltwater crocodile?
They probably don't. There are probably wild individuals of other species of crocodile that are that old as well.
Oh.
Almost. There was an Australian freshwater crocodile, which is a small, relatively harmless species from Australia, that was at Steve Irwin's Australia Zoo. They called him Mr. Freshie, and he was about 130 when he passed away.
Wow. So very similarly to obviously, I think most people would know that tortoises can live an extremely long time, Richard, and obviously certain whales and the Greenland shark is renowned for its age. Do we know what the expected lifespan of a crocodilian is, regardless of whether it's in the wild or in captivity? As you said about their size changes by being kept captive for whatever reason, they don't grow as much. Do they live longer in captivity, or is this one of those things that we're never really going to know because nobody's been around long enough to tag one to see how old they get?
I think it's one of those things that we're never going to know. There was a crocodile in a man-eater, and it was called the Bujang Senang. And that means happy bachelor. And it's quite a jolly name for man-eating. And it was thought that it began to prey on people in 1982, and it had a very distinctive white markings along the back. And its first victim was this guy called Bangan Anak Pale, who was an Iban farmer. And it grabbed a hold of him and ate him. And then every so often it would reappear and eat someone else. And there's a legend in Borneo of a Dayak warrior who was this undefeated great warrior, and some of his enemies captured his wife and laid a trap for him and killed him with spears and killed his wife as well. And in revenge, his spirit transformed into a great white crocodile, which would come back for all the descendants of his enemies. And the people in Borneo thought that the Bujang Senang was this it had white markings down the back, was this mythical white crocodile. And they had a commissioner of police go after it with a load of people with harpoons and bear traps and guns and grenades. And it completely evaded all of them. And then some people came forward and said, like, we remember this crocodile, and it's been around since the 1950s at least. This one with a white back, because the one guy had been eaten in 1962 by this creature, and another one in 1965 and 1979. So it had been eating people since the 1960s, and it had been seen since before that. So, and it was an adult then, so it was very, very old. And when they finally captured it, it killed this woman in a relatively shallow part of the river. And they blocked it off with logs and stuff and started shooting at it and throwing spears at it, and nothing could penetrate the hide. And when it opened its mouth to attack some of the guys, they all shot together into its mouth, into the soft palate of its mouth, which finally killed it. And they've got the skeleton, the skin and the skull today on display. And it was 19 feet 1 inch, which is big, but by no means anything like the maximum for the species. But that had been around for decades, and it had got this mystical, this mystique about it. because it was a big man-eater, like many of these do. They get this mystique, and it was linked to these old legends. And Borneo is still a hotspot for gigantic crocodiles.
I mean, this is one of the other aspects about this, because obviously some of the largest members of the crocodile family that have been caught have been from Southeast Asia, haven't they, Richard? Obviously, Lolong is probably the most famous.
Yeah, biggest in captivity, just over 20 feet, But
and I was going to say, I always remember watching the documentary about that particular capture, Richard. And the one thing that's always stuck with me after watching it was that all the local people that lived near where Lolong was hanging around said, "Yes, you've caught that one, but the bigger one's still out there." And they were convinced. Pothole. And I just thought, I can't imagine what it must feel like when you see something that big swimming next to you as you're canoeing down the river.
Pothole black. And one guy said, because they have these floating communities on pontoons, and this guy he had like a decking where he would go out, to get into his boat and stuff next to his house, and he kept chickens on it, and he said the thing had been attracted by the chickens, and it had come alongside this decking, and he said it was as long as the decking, and the decking was 29 feet, so he had a measurable frame of reference. That one's still there. That's one of the ones I want to go and look for, but he's still there. And they reckon he was the one that was doing the man-eating, not Lolong. This bigger one was the actual man-eater.
And it's still out there, Richard, because we've not heard anything about, because I think, when was Lolong caught? Was that 2013 or?
Yes, something like that, yeah.
Remarkable. I mean, one of the other aspects about all these as well, Richard, is that the one that always seems to get overlooked for me is the Orinoco crocodile, which is in South America and is apparently extremely rare. But to all intents and purposes, they can grow to gigantic size as well, can't they?
Yes, they can grow about the same size as a Nile crocodile, about 23 feet in terms of length, but they're not so broad in the beam. Same with the American crocodile. It's a similar length to the Nile crocodile, but it's not so chunky. The Orinoco crocodile, back in the olden days, the natives said that a handful of people every year get killed by them, not very many. But now they're so rare that there hasn't been a death recorded from them in 100 years at least. These old world, these new world ones aren't generally as aggressive as the ones from Africa and Asia, because the saltwater crocodile, and particularly the Nile crocodile, have evolved alongside large mammals. So they're attacking and killing large mammals like zebras and water buffalo and antelopes and things like that. Whereas the ones in South America are eating mainly fish and monkeys and smaller things, because the occasional tapir, they'll take down jaguars, a big Orinoco crocodile or American crocodile will take down a jaguar, and a black caiman. Caiman. You often see these films of jaguars killing small caimans, like the spectacle caiman.
Yes.
But they're only like 5-6 feet long. Black caiman can be 20 feet, and it will one-shot a jaguar with its jaws. And once again, black caiman very rarely attack people. A handful of deaths are attributed to them, because they don't really prey on big mammals very often, because there are not big mammals there. Now, the exception is the Cuban crocodile, which isn't very big. It gets to about 11 feet long. It's quite small as crocodiles go, but it's exceptionally aggressive. Its teeth are more curving than most other crocodiles. It spends more time on land than any other crocodile, and it will hunt in groups. And it's thought that they evolved to prey on ground sloths that used to be on the island. And the ground sloths are extinct now, so they eat mainly fish. But they are quite aggressive as well.
Well, this is the other thing about crocodiles as well, Richard, that I think will surprise people, is that they have been shown to work in tandem with other crocodiles to get over obstacles, to corral fish.
Yeah, they'll make walls. They'll stand on each other's backs to make walls in the water to corral the fish. And when they've got a big prey item like a dead hippo or something, some of them will anchor it with their jaws, while others rip pieces off and eat them, and they'll take turns, and it's all very orderly. And the mother crocodile from Sri Lanka, which also does eat people occasionally, not so much as the Nile or the saltwater, but it is a known mater, that has been seen to balance sticks on its snout. And when a bird comes to either perch on the stick or get it for building a nest, it grabs the bird. So it's using bait. And crocodiles have been seen to kill fish and use that as bait to attract bigger animals. So that's understanding how the mind of another animal works.
Yeah.
So that's showing true intelligence.
Remarkable. And I suppose, as we're talking about this, the granddaddy of them all, the one that gets bigger than any of them, is obviously the salty, Richard. These have been seen to take down sharks, because this is the thing about saltwater crocodiles. They're called saltwater crocodiles for a reason. They quite happy swimming wherever, aren't they? They don't care.
Oh yeah, they're top of the food chain. They'll take down sharks. The Nile crocodile takes down bull sharks in freshwater, but the saltwater crocodile will go out to sea and take them as well.
Yeah,
I mean, both the saltwater and the Nile are thought to reach about 28 feet. And there's one shot by a woman called Chris Pawlowski on the MacArthur bank of the Norman River in Australia in the 1950s, which was measured at 28 feet 4 inches. And then there was a Nile crocodile shot in a river in Tanzania in 1903 by a very respected German zoologist called Hans Besser, and he measured it at 25 feet, but it had 3 feet missing from the end of its tail, which was probably bitten off by another crocodile when it was young. So if it had the 3 extra feet, it would have also been 28 feet. So they both probably approach the 30-foot mark on rare occasions, although ones over 20 feet are very uncommon these days, but they still exist. But even an average-sized one will take down a lion or a tiger. Even a 14, 15-foot one will have no trouble in doing that.
I mean, to be fair, Richard, it shows how little people really know about crocodiles. I think that when we talk about their level of intelligence, their ferocious appetite, their knack for observing the world around them and acting with it in an intelligent way, do you think this is also somehow one of those things where the perception of animals as being stupid or just food orientated is once again shown to be completely wrong when it comes to the crocodiles? These are clever, social, intuitive creatures that are far cleverer than we could ever give them credit for.
They've shown behaviour that points out that they can understand the minds of other animals. And they'll observe the bank, and they'll see if prey is coming there, and if human prey is coming there, and they'll observe the days in which people come, and they'll wait. So they have a notion of when you come and go as well, from observation. So they're far more intelligent than we give them credit for. But at the same time, you've also got to reason that they're not hell-bent on destruction. They'll only kill you, want to eat you. They won't kill out of spite. They never kill out of spite. Well,
this is the other thing as well. In regards to their appetites, Richard, how often does a crocodile need to eat? Because obviously we know that sometimes reptiles are quite happy to eat very sporadically and wait a couple of months on occasions.
Oh, yeah, they can go a year without eating if they have to. But generally, it depends on how big the meal is. But they'll... in places like East Africa and the Graneti River and the Mara River, where you have the big migrations of zebra and gnu and stuff, they'll gorge themselves because that's the feeding. They'll lay down fat. Then they'll eat masses and masses, and then the rest of the year they'll make do with the odd baboon or antelope or unwary human. But they generally they'll eat every few days, depending on how much prey they've got and how big the prey is. Well, in captivity, I used to feed them a couple of times a week, and they were perfectly happy with that. Because they've got a lower, more efficient metabolism than mammals, they don't need to eat so often. And they break down everything, hair, bone. There's no crocodilian leftovers. They're the most powerful stomach acid of any animal, so they can break down absolutely everything. But there are other big reptiles that occasionally eat people as well, like the reticulated python. Southeast Asia, which is there are lots of venomous snakes that kill people when they tread on them or they turn around and bite them, but they don't look on human beings as prey because we're too big. The biggest venomous snake, the king cobra, is about 18 feet, and it's too small to eat a human being. But the book is specifically about animals that eat people, not about animals that kill people, because elephants, rhinos, hippos, water buffalo, bison will all occasionally trample or gore you to death, but they won't eat you. Except for one case, the woman-eating elephant of World War II, which is in the second volume of the book. But that was a very strange case. But so it's about animals that specifically eat you. And the only snakes that specifically eat human beings are the big constrictors and the reticulated python, which is the largest python, going up to 33 feet. They have taken people on a semi-regular basis mainly in Indonesia, in places like Sulawesi and Sumatra, usually in semi-cultivated areas. They have this area called the garden, which is usually on the outskirts of the village. Before you get to the jungle proper, they grow crops and they have semi-wild areas where they'll pick fruit as well. So it's not true jungle and it's not true farmland. It's somewhere in between. And a lot of these places is where large pythons grab a hold of people. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. People go out to tend their crops and things, and they don't come back. Yeah.
Well, there's recently been a story about a woman in Indonesia, Richard, which I think happened in the last week or so, who was taken by a python, and they were saying it was the second such incident in a month, that another python had also taken another female on her way to the shops or going. And no, the one that was taken was going to get some medicine, the most recent one, and the one prior to that I think was working in crops, and both were taken, and it was their husbands that came and spotted these enormous pythons with extremely large bellies.
Yes, yeah. The first one was about 26 foot that ate the woman, and the second one was about 17 foot. Yeah, but they were not included in the book because they only just happened. It's just an ongoing thing. Yeah. There's a guy called Frank Buck, and the series Bring Them Back Alive was based on his exploits, and he used to catch wild animals for zoos and things. And he wrote in a book called Wild Cargo about when he was in the Philippines, and he encountered an old man who got a 25-foot python as a pet, and he allowed it to roam free. And one day his son went missing, and they were looking for his son all over, and they saw a huge bulge in the python's belly, and they realised that the python had eaten him. And he said, "Oh well, that's all right then." He wasn't sad. He said the boy has gone to sleep inside of a god, because he sort of venerated the python. I mean, I've kept a lot of pythons as well. I've been attacked by pythons, and I have these rows of backward pointing teeth. And if they grab a hold of you, they anchor on with these backward pointing teeth, and then they constrict you. They whip their coils around you, and they tighten up until your heart can't beat. They restrict the blood flow. They don't actually crush things. People think that they crush their prey. They actually constrict it, which is stopping the blood flow to organs, and then they'll swallow it. And they don't swallow things alive either, because if it's still writhing about inside, it could cause internal damage. So they'll make sure it's dead first, and then they swallow it whole. And the thing to do if you're attacked by a big constricting snake is not to pull away, because it will just rip the teeth further into your flesh. You push your arm down the animal's throat, and it will let go. Which seems counterintuitive if you're being attacked by a really great snake.
Yes.
But
it would seem to be the last thing you would want to do is put your arm further into its mouth, Richard.
Yeah, but that's the way to make them let go. I know that from experience. Thankfully, I never had a croc bite me, but I've had plenty of snakes. Go up there.
I suppose the other aspect of it, I mean, snakes are probably one of the most maligned, incorrectly as well, Richard, creatures on the planet, because they are, once again, extremely intelligent, have been shown to be extremely caring, loving, social creatures, Once again, there are millions of people around the world that probably keep snakes as pet, Richard, who think they are as normal as having a cat or a dog or a budgie.
Well, I'd prefer to have a snake than a cat. I'm not very keen on cats, actually. Cats and chimpanzees are something that I don't like very much. And parrots are unbelievably vicious. Vicious, noisy, dirty things. Cats are incredibly destructive and false. Dogs I adore. I absolutely adore dogs. But yeah, I'd much sooner have a snake than a parrot or a cat.
I suppose the other aspect of this, in regards to the python as well, is that obviously over the last 30 or 40 years, Richard, we've got this situation developing in the States, in Florida primarily, where whatever the reason was, because I've seen 3 or 4 different versions of why this problem started. Was it due to this? Was it due to the hurricane that came in and smashed down the airport luggage department and the snakes got free? Was it frightened pet owners, very similar to why everybody was flushing pet alligators down the toilets in the 70s and 80s, Richard? It's one of those things that now we've got this situation, it would seem, where some people are suggesting that the Florida Everglades are now home to a super python, where we've basically got the snakes that have been caught in Florida. And you just think, well, this has only been going on for 30 years, Richard.
Yeah.
And some of these snakes are getting to enormous sizes already, because essentially they're turning up into an ecosystem where nothing will eat them.
Boas and pythons can't crossbreed. They're not closely related at all. But the reticulated python can crossbreed with a Burmese python, and both of them can crossbreed with the African rock python. All 3 have been recorded in Florida, and the only thing that will eat them in Florida is a big alligator. A big alligator will make mincemeat off them. Yeah, they'll take small alligators, but they are a invasive species, and they are a big problem. The thing that's stopping them getting much further north is cold weather. So when you get further north, Louisiana, and the winters are too cold. And even a cold winter in Florida knocks them back a bit. But they're probably the thing that's here to stay. A bit like grey squirrels in Britain. They're probably, you'll never get rid of them now. I think they're there forever. And the African rock python I've kept those too, and they're very aggressive. And they can grow up to about 25 feet. And there was a case from a few years ago about some picking mangoes, and one of them was attacked, and that the friends went up into the tree, and they were stuck up there for about 3 hours while the 20-foot python constricted their mate, swallowed this boy, I think he was about 14, and then slithered off, and the snake was never caught. So they occasionally take people as well.
I think as well, for a lot of people, as you mentioned there about the alligator probably being the only thing that can probably fight back there in Florida.
And the American crocodile as well. Yes. You get the American crocodile down on the tip of Florida. Yeah.
Well, that population's bouncing back as well, isn't it? Because I think they were down into the low hundreds, and now they're into the mid thousands now. So because there's a real conservation effort with the American crocodile, which there should be really, because they are beautiful creatures. And so most people remember that infamous photo from a few years ago, Richard, of that snake that had exploded with an alligator hanging out of it, and something had come along and bitten its head off.
Well, what happened there? It's an interesting story. Territory, and the bigger alligator killed the smaller one. The python ate the dead smaller alligator, and then but it was too big, and it burst out of the python's belly, and then another alligator came along and ate the dead python. And, nothing gets wasted in nature.
No. I think one of the creatures that I've always had a massive interest in over the years, Richard, is probably one of my favourites on the planet, and that's the Komodo dragon. Primarily because as a young boy growing up, Richard, they always seem to remind me of those creatures that had strange things stuck on them to stand in for dinosaurs in some bad B movie.
Oh, yeah, none of them looked anything like any kind of dinosaur.
And
even as a kid, I was always annoyed and disappointed when films did that.
Yes.
I wanted Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion dinosaur.
Yeah, not Valley of the Guanji or something where they've just stuck a frill on a lizard. But the Komodo, I think, is one of those, because I remember one of the episodes of Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World was talking about large lizards and snakes from around the world, Richard. And I remember them interviewing a British cameraman who said he saw the biggest Komodo dragon he'd ever seen. This is like 40, 50 years ago now. And the thing about Komodos is they're vicious. They are frighteningly strong. They are aggressive. They are territorial. They are incredibly clever. Some of the stories you hear about the Komodos are absolutely terrifying. I remember seeing an interview with a policeman who'd gone to have a nap because he wasn't feeling very well. And he came round with a pain in his foot, and when he had a look, there was a Komodo dragon chewing off one of his toes. Yeah,
and they're venomous as well. They have venomous saliva.
Yeah.
In terms of weight, they're the biggest venomous animal in the world. They have big venom glands in their neck. What they'll do is they'll bite, inject the venom with the saliva, and the venom stops blood clotting. So the creature, the prey, is weakened from blood loss, and they'll follow their prey often for days until it dies and then eat it. They weren't even discovered until 1912.
Yeah.
But the one you mentioned there, the giant one from Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, that wasn't actually a Komodo dragon. That was a Salvadori dragon, which comes from but this particular one was supposed to be a super large individual. And from time to time, you get stories coming out of New Guinea of these giant lizards, several times bigger than the Komodo dragon. There was a story from 1960 of these huge lizards coming out of the jungle in New Guinea and killing a load of people. And the villagers were putting up stockades to stop them. And a news crew from Australia went over to check it out, and they didn't see the lizards, but they saw some of their victims who'd been torn to shreds. And I've been trying to find out more about this story for years, and I've never been able to find out all the details on it. But from time to time, you'll get a report of a living dinosaur in New Guinea. There's a story about 10 years ago from New Britain, which is this archipelago off of New Guinea, of this giant creature that stood up on its hind legs and killed dogs, and everyone was saying it was a dinosaur. It's probably a very, very big Salvadori dragon, because monitor lizards can rear up on their hind legs, and there's stories of these things getting 25, 30 feet long. Unverified, but it's another thing that needs checking out.
They can climb as well, can't they, Ridge?
Yeah, they can. They go right up into trees, unlike the Komodo dragon, which doesn't climb that well. But, Komodo dragons have eaten people. There was a German banker in the early 70s who was oh no, he wasn't a banker. He was he was some sort of minor nobleman. He was a member of the German aristocracy, and he'd gone off the trail, and all they found of him was his shoe when the Komodo dragons got him. And between 1974 and 2012, 5 people have been killed by Komodo dragons. So that's not all that much compared to other large animals. But you've got to remember they have a very, very restricted distribution, and there are not very many people living within that distribution. If there were more of them living cheek and jowl with human beings, there would be more attacks, no doubt.
I suppose as well, as you say there, Richard, we've only known about them for just over 100 years, so there's so much that we yet to discover about these particular creatures. I suppose one of the terms I've often heard about Komodos, and often you will hear this mentioned in regards to crocodiles as well, is this term of rogue. A rogue Komodo dragon or a rogue crocodile. Whereas I've never really understood that term, Richard, because we're talking about predators. And therefore, are they really going rogue, or are they just doing what comes normal and they just show a higher level of intelligence because they think these soft things that walk about on 2 legs are very easy to catch if you try hard enough?
Well, I think that if a crocodile kills someone and finds it's very easy to kill a human being, it doesn't have to struggle so much as if it's taking down a tiger or a water buffalo or something. It will remember that, and it will go for the easy meal, because they're intelligent animals.
I suppose one of the interesting things about the Komodo as well is, are they on Flores Island, Richard?
Yes, they are. They are on Flores. Flores, Rincho and Komodo.
Which would be very interesting because obviously, as one of our country's top cryptozoologists, Richard, Flores is a very notable place over the last 20 years. Are we perhaps going to uncover a situation where we find out that there may be Komodos that have preyed on the Flores peoples of the past, that we're going to discover this?
Oh, they would have certainly preyed on the Homo floresiensis, absolutely. There was a giant stork that preyed on them as well. It was similar to a marabou stork, but it was as tall as a man. And there was another now extinct species of giant monitor lizards on Flores as well, slightly bigger than the Komodo dragon, which would have taken them down. And of course, on mainland Australia, you used to have Varanus priscus, that used to be called Megalania prisca. Varanus priscus, known from fragmentary remains, giant monitor lizard of the Pleistocene that was feeding on the giant kangaroos and giant wombats and giant birds that used to live in Australia in the Pleistocene. And that was 23 to 30 feet long. Again, it's only known from fragmentary remains, so we can't be 100% sure of what size it maxed out at. But it was a venomous lizard the size of a bus, basically.
There are parts of the Pacific where certain creatures have passed on and gone extinct, Richard, which you think, for the love of God, you would not wish to have lived through when you think about some of these creatures that exist in areas around the Pacific. And I'm always reminded of the Haast eagle.
Yeah.
Because I can't think of anything more frightening than an eagle that ate moas. Because the moa's a big bird. I know it may have just gone after juveniles or whatever, Richard, but still.
Oh no, it attacked. We know from the bones it attacked adults.
Yeah.
It would swoop down and maul their backs and necks, and of course it couldn't lift them off the ground. But once it had killed them, it could just return to the carcass whenever it liked and fed on them. Now, this is covered more in the second volume, but eagles have been known to kill cows in a similar way. They'll swoop down and gouge their backs with their beaks and claws until they die, and then eat them. And there are rare accounts of eagles attacking people. There was a girl called Marie Delex in, I think it was 1838, was attacked and killed by a golden eagle in Switzerland. The crowned eagle in Africa has killed several children because they're primate eaters and they identified children as primates. And there's a bird called a lammergeier, or bearded vulture, which is a gigantic vulture found in Africa, parts of Europe, parts of Asia, that eats exclusively bones. But unlike most other vultures, it will attack and kill live prey. And it will force animals as big as ibex and deer and mountain goats off the side of mountains. And then it will wait for other predators to strip the flesh off, and then it will go and eat the bones, because it eats 90% of its diet is bone. And these have been known to attack people on rare occasions. And it's thought that maybe some lone hikers in mountains have been pushed to their death by bearded vultures. They've been attacked when they're up on ledges and things, fell off, and were eaten by the vultures. You don't think of birds as eating people, but yeah, they do.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we've all seen footage of them, fairly large eagles taking rabbits and lambs and things like that, Richard, and obviously certain areas they will feast on domestic pets as well, which is one of those things I think sometimes people just don't think about. Depending on where you live in the world, if you think your dog's running about in the back garden, you've got to be very careful in certain parts of the United States, especially, Richard.
Yeah.
And it just shows you often how little we know, because I've never heard of eagles attacking cows in that manner. I would think that would be too large.
Yes, you would have thought that. But they swoop down onto their backs and maul them until they die, and then they'll feed on the carcass. And weirdly, there's a type of parrot in New Zealand called a kea that does the same thing to sheep.
Yes.
They'll attack sheep and basically eat them alive.
Yes.
land on their backs and eat the fat from around their livers.
Yeah, they basically burrow into them, don't they? It's crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me with parrots, though, because parrots are vicious birds. Well, the time when I was a zookeeper, I was never bitten by crocodiles. I was bitten loads of times by parrots, bloody evil-tempered things. And then, of course, you have sharks. Now, there's more hysteria about sharks than probably any other animal.
Yes.
About 5 people annually get killed by sharks worldwide, whereas human beings kill about 100 million sharks, mainly for their sins.
Yeah.
To put it into perspective. And there's only really about 4 or 5 species of shark that are thought to be dangerous to human beings, and they get all the limelight. But there are some spectacular stories, and one of them happened in December of 1981 at South Moss Beach in Spanish Bay, Monterey, California. And it was the 19th of December, and he'd gone out surfing with a friend of his. The sea was bumpy, and it was throwing up some big waves, so they had a great time surfing. And then they decided to call it a day, and they went to have a coffee, and his friend said goodbye to him and drove off. Now, apparently, afterwards, Lewis Boren decided to go back in and catch one last wave and disappeared. A couple of days later, some walkers found his surfboard with a great circular mark out of it. And a couple of days after that, they found his body, and the left half of it, from his armpit to his thigh, had been completely eviscerated. And when experts measured the bite radius, they said this was from a great white shark, 23 feet long, making it the biggest one ever recorded anywhere in the world. And if he hadn't gone back in that last swim, the last surf, he would have still been alive. It's almost certain that the shark saw him from underneath and didn't know what it was, did an exploratory. There's 2 kinds of shark attack. There's ones where they explore things with their mouth and they might bite you, sometimes fatally, but they don't like the taste. Particularly the great white, it feeds mainly on marine mammals like seals and sea lions. They're like very calorific, rich prey with lots of blubber. Human beings are a bit too bony for them, and they'll usually spit them out. But there are cases of great whites eating people as well. But this was a particularly big one. There's another case of a woman called Shirley Ann Durden, and she was out swimming with her family at Port Lincoln, South Australia, a place called Wiseman's Beach, and she was about 30 feet from the shore, and in front of her wife and kids, great white grabbed hold of her and literally bit her in 2. And this one was about 20 feet long, but that just ate her. It all depends on how hungry they are, because when a great white is fed, if it's well fed, it's just not interested in you. You might have seen the people swimming with that particularly big great white called deep blue.
Yes.
And they swim with it because it's just fed. If you look at how fat it is, it's just fed. So they know full well it's not interested in hunting and killing and eating because it's so bloated.
I suppose as well the great white probably gets more negative press out of all the shark family, Richard. Probably due to cultural influence, I suspect, thanks to one of the greatest films ever made, Jaws. But the bull shark and the tiger shark are the two, in my limited experience, Richard, that probably you need to be more wary about, especially the bull, because the bull is probably renowned because of its ability to swim in fresh as well as salt water. And ironically, as I mentioned Jaws and being about a great white, it was a bull shark attack at the turn of the 20th century that inspired Jaws.
Matawan Creek. Yes, the Matawan Creek in New Jersey, yes. Because these things can enter and tolerate fresh water. And they seem to go into fresh water to avoid competition with the sharks. This one was like miles and miles inland, and the captain had seen it. And he reported he'd seen it swimming under a bridge. No one believed him because at the time they didn't believe that sharks were going to fresh water. Now, there'd been a couple of fatal attacks off the New Jersey coast a few weeks prior. And then a sea captain sees this thing going along Matalan Creek. No one believes him. And then it enters this big pool and some kids going for a swim. And there's a kid called Lester Stilwell. And it grabs a hold of him. And it's got him in its mouth. And this other guy goes in to try and rescue, and it turns on him and kills him as well. So this bull shark killed 2 people, something like 16 miles inland in Matalan Creek in, I think it was 1916, if my memory serves me well. Now, it's been thought that it was the same shark that carried out as well, but that's not necessarily the case, because the small great white, about 8 feet long, was actually captured in a net and bludgeoned to death, and that had human remains in it. So that was probably the one that did it out at the sea. And the bull shark was the one that killed the 2 people inland. So it probably wasn't the same shark, because great whites don't enter fresh water. They can't tolerate fresh water, unlike the bull shark.
Yeah. I suppose as well, Richard, we've not had one of those headlines yet in this country, but we always seem to get one every year, it seems, where certain newspapers will say, great whites finally spotted.
Oh, we had one the other week, yes. We had one the other week. It was off Galway. It's supposed to be there was film of what was transparently a great white shark, and they said it was taken off Galway, but it wasn't. It was taken off South Africa. But having said that, we should be well within the temperature range that the great white shark tolerates. We have the biggest population of grey seals anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been some very compelling sightings. About 10 or so years ago, up in, I think it was in the Shetlands, there was a group of marine biologists studying seals. And suddenly all the seals jumped up out of the water. And they saw this big fin, and they thought, oh, yeah, that's a basking shark. Then the fin turned towards them. And because of the reaction of the seals, they thought they'd better get back on the boat. Good job they did. It came right up to the boat, and one of the guys on the boat was a shark expert, and he'd seen great whites off South Africa. And he said it was 100% a great white. And it came alongside the boat. It was grey above, and a clear demarcation, white below, and it sort of turned in the water, and he could see its eye looking up at him, which is great, typical great white behaviour. Then there was a spate of sightings along the north coast of Cornwall around Loo.
Mm-hmm.
One fisherman said he saw, and he went over to where it was, and there was part of the seal still in the water, but he said he wouldn't dare try and grab a hold of the carcass. And that was seen by numerous people, and apparently it got tangled in fishing nets and died and was cut loose because the fisherman was scared. There's another one off the south coast of Britain where some fishermen hauled one up onto one night fishing. They hauled it up actually onto their boat. It was on the deck thrashing around. It was about 12 feet long. It wasn't a huge one, but it escaped back into the water. And experts have found seals with bite marks on them, and they said if this was, California or South Africa or Australia, I'd say that was definitely a great white. Mm. And there was even a photograph taken. Some fishermen got one tangled in the nets in Scotland, took a couple of photographs before it got away, and this was shown to various shark experts, and they said, yeah, that's a great white. But when they said it was in Scotland, they said, no, it can't be then. No, it's definitely not, if it's in Scotland. Which is ridiculous because you get them up in Nova Scotia, which is at least as cold as Scotland.
Yes.
And with global temperatures rising, we should expect more of them to turn up in British waters.
Mm. Well, it's not the great whites I'm worried about, Richard, it's the bull sharks. They can stay as far away as they want.
Well, bull sharks are a tropical, like the tiger shark, they're a tropical species.
Good.
Bull shark. And even with global warming, you wouldn't get them in Europe, not at all. Not for a minute. But great whites, yes.
It's interesting. I remember watching a documentary a few years ago, Richard, about the Mediterranean, and there is this train of thought, because I know there have been occasional shark attacks, primarily off the coast of Egypt, more than anything. But there are a lot of people out in the Med
oceanic whitesuits,
who believe that there is a population of a predatory shark in the Mediterranean, and yet when experts look at this, they completely dismiss it and say, no, there's no sharks in the Mediterranean. And you just think, well, why would you know that? How would that be, Richard? Because we constantly keep seeing that these well-held presumptions about things like, in regards to certain species of animal, we are constantly being forced to change our preconceived ideas or our perceptions on a section of information or a brief study that's been done on some of these creatures, and we keep learning and learning and learning. I find it remarkable that people completely dismiss out of hand any shark going into the Mediterranean, and yet every year dozens of people disappear swimming in the Med, off the coast of Italy, off the coast of Greece, off the coast of Turkey. They're going somewhere, Richard. The question is, what is it?
Well, 1987, great white was tangled in some nets outside of, just off the coast of Malta. Was dredged up, measured at 23 feet long, great white. Funnily enough, a few days later, another one the same size was caught off Kangaroo Island, off the coast of southern Australia. So two big 23-foot great whites were caught within days of each other in 1987. But there's the film of that one in the Mediterranean eating another shark, which is transparently a huge great white. There was a paper by, I think he was a Turkish ichthyologist, about great whites caught around the Bosphorus and near Turkey, where they used to have the huge tuna runs. And he recorded dozens and dozens of great whites captured, lots of them upwards of 20 feet, specimens up to 23 feet caught from the 1950s right up to the 80s, and then it seemed to drop off in the 80s when the tuna population crashed. So you do get them.
But I suppose as certain changes to the way people fish develop over the years and certain populations aren't targeted as much, especially as you say there, tuna, Richard, when as we mentioned earlier about California, the seal population off the coast of California has exploded over the last 20 years because they are now a protected species. That has then had the domino effect of, well, there's more seals, so now there's more sharks. And so we know that once you introduce or you allow a population to recover, there is also the added, some would say a bonus, Richard, of the fact that whatever eats that particular species suddenly goes, oh, hang on a minute, there's lots more of my favourite food here now.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a good thing, because we need big predators. We need these big apex predators in our ecosystems. They're good for them. It shows that the environment is thriving. And sharks do a vital job in controlling the numbers of other animals. They're very good for the oceans in general.
I suppose if we return back to the land, Richard, the one creature that often fills me with both incredible awe and terrible dread is the polar bear.
Oh, yes.
I've always found these creatures majestically beautiful and deceptively vicious, Richard. And one of the stories that you include about this is about this group of students from the British Exploring Society. This is only in 2011. This is 13 years ago, Richard, who were on an exploration on the island of Svalbard, which is inside the Arctic Circle. I can only imagine the terror that these guys must have felt over the few minutes that they were attacked, because the level of damage that one polar bear did to a group of people is simply staggering.
Oh, yes. Most bears are omnivores, and this ranges from the giant panda, which is sort of 99% herbivorous. And funnily enough, the giant panda has the most powerful bite of any bear, because it deals with thick, fibrous bamboo.
Yes.
You wouldn't have thought that.
No.
Most bears eat even things like grizzlies eat a great deal of vegetation. The prehistoric cave there, which was gigantic, fed almost entirely on grasses and sedges. But polar bears, due to their Arctic home, there's not much to eat by way of plants up there. So they feed on seals, walruses, narwhals, belugas, muskox, reindeer, fish roe, seabirds, and anything, including people, because the environment is so savage up there and so demanding that you've got to take anything you can get. And once again, people forget that they're human beings. When they go into these areas, they think that they're not an animal. They're not on the prey list, and they are. But the guy you're on about was called Horatio Chappell, who was killed and eaten, and several other people were mauled, including a guy called Michael Reed and Andy Rook, when it attacked their camp. And no, they're not the only ones. As recently as 2023, there was a native Eskimo woman called Summer Miamek, who was 24, and a one-year-old son, Clyde. They were walking 300 feet from their village, and a blizzard was blowing, and they didn't see that a polar bear was stalking them. It attacked and killed both of them. And they've been known to walk into towns. They've been known just to mosey into towns that are near the Arctic Circle and kill people. Like at Churchill in Manitoba, there was a 46-year-old guy called Thomas Munton. He was just walking down the street in 1983, and he was attacked and eaten by a polar bear in a town.
Yeah.
And because of global warming and the ice melting now, polar bears are moving further south, and they're mating with the brown bear, because the brown bear is the ancestor of the polar bear. The polar bear only evolved fairly recently from the brown bear, so you're getting hybrids now, which will be an interesting thing to see how that works out, because we might see the emergence of a whole new species that is a hybrid between the brown bear and the polar bear. Brown bears probably are the most dangerous. I mean, the ones involved in the most attacks are probably Asian black bears and sloth bears, because they meet people more often. But with the sloth bears mainly feed on fruit, termites and ants, but they've got these great claws for ripping into termite mounds and ant hills, and they use them to defend themselves against tigers. And they're very aggressive because they're quite a small bear. They're smaller than a tiger, so they live alongside tigers, so they have to be aggressive to defend themselves. So, they see a human being, they interpret it as a threat, and then they attack them, usually more in the face with these great claws, and they kill far more people each year than big cats. But there are cases like the sloth bear of Mysore in India in the early part of the 20th century that not only killed people, but it started to eat them as well until it was finally brought down. But perhaps the most interesting story, the most frightening story, was from Japan. You don't usually associate Japan with bears, but there are two types of bears in Japan. There's the Asian black bear, and then there's the Ussuri brown bear, which is the same one you get up in Siberia. And you get these on the northern island, Hokkaido, of Japan. And up in Siberia, these things have been known to kill and eat full-grown Siberian tigers. They're immense. They're almost as big as a Kodiak bear and highly aggressive. But in a remote village called Sanketsu in Hokkaido in November of 1915, there was a fence unfolded that were almost like the plot of a horror film. In fact, in Japan, they did make a horror film about this. And it began one morning in mid-November when one of these bears turned up on the Akita family's farm. It scared the horse and made off with a sack of corn. And it returned again and again, hanging around the farm. So they brought 2 traditional hunters in to try and deal with it, and they shot at it, but it was only wounded. And they tracked the trail of blood to a mountain and lost it in a snowstorm. But they thought, it's been injured, it won't be back. It should have been in hibernation, but it wasn't. Then on December the 19th, at 10:30, the bear returned, and it turned up at the farm of the Otar family. And the farmer's wife, Abby Mayu, was at home with a baby that the family was looking after. And the bear broke into the house, because these were like wooden huts, and killed the baby by biting its head. And the woman tried to drive it off, but it caught her and killed her, dragged her off in the forest and ate her. And the farm looked like a slaughterhouse, apparently. There was pools of blood everywhere. And the next day, a 30-man group set out to kill the bear and recover the woman's body. And they met the bear in the forest and shot at it, but only one of the shots hit. And it drove the bear away. They recovered the body, but most of it had been eaten. So the bear returned to the same farm again that night, and the villagers were waiting for it with guns. But it appears that the villagers, when they actually saw the bear, they were so scared of it, nobody actually shot it. They all ran away. So they got 50 guardsmen in to try and hunt it down. And they thought it had gone down river, but actually it had done a big circle and come back to another farm, and it was owned by a guy called Miyoki Yatsuru, and he was away from home at the time with his friend and neighbour Satio Ishiguro, and there were only women and children in both of the family's farms. And Yarrow, his wife, was cooking dinner, and she had with a young baby on her back, and she heard a odd rumbling noise outside, and then the bear broke through the window, overturned the cooking pot, putting out the fire, pitching the whole place into darkness. And in the darkness, the bear just wreaked havoc. It bit the woman's legs, pulling her over. It bit the baby. There was a guard at the house, and he ran to investigate. And the bear released the mother and the child, who managed to get away. And then the bear attacked this guard called Odo, and the bear ripped him apart with its claws. Then it attacked another one of the sons of a neighbouring family, and then another son, and it killed both of them, and then it killed another person. It was just going berserk. And later testimony, the villagers said they heard some of the people begging. One of the women was pregnant, and it was the bear she was begging the bear not to eat her belly, but to eat her head instead. And the guards, realising that they were not on the bear's trail, returned to the village, but it was too late, and all these people had just been torn to ribbons. And a few of them survived, but most of them had been killed and eaten. So the guards broke up into 2 groups to try and catch the creature, and they saw it across a river, but their guns misfired, and the bear escaped again. So only 2 people actually survived the attacks, and the guy whose farm it was, well, the 2 guys whose farms had been attacked, they'd been unaware of the horror that had befallen their families until they got back, and they decided what they needed to do was go and get a professional veteran bear hunter. And they visited this man's house. He was called Yamamoto Hekichi, and he'd been retired for some time, but he recognized the description of the bear, and he called it Kazake, which means sash, because it had markings on its fur, the colour of its fur, making it look like it was wearing a sash. And he said that previously, before, Kazake had killed and eaten 3 women in years past, and he came out of retirement to hunt the beast. And eventually, he cracked it and found it asleep under a tree and managed to shoot it and kill it under a tree. But the bear had killed so many people and mauled so many people and destroyed so many farms that the village was then abandoned. And today, it's like a little memorial park, and there's a big statue of the bear breaking into one of these houses. But this one bear destroyed a whole village and killed many, many people in just a few days. And when they finally examined him, they found he was underweight, this bear, and he wasn't in hibernation because he hadn't put down enough fat. And they worked out that the people in the village and roundabouts had killed all the deer. So they'd taken away his main food source, and that's why he had turned to man-eating. 8 foot 9 inches tall he was, and weighed 750 pounds, which was very light for a bear of that size. But, the human remains were found in his stomach.
I mean, I was shocked, Richard, because I'd never come across that story before.
It's not well known outside of Japan.
Well, as we were talking earlier about sharks, I mean, the other thing is, there is another incredible bear attack from Japan in 1970. And you just think, this is just incredible, because these are the kinds of stories that if these would happen, because obviously there's a very famous incident in Montana, I think, in 1989, when it's known as Night of the Grizzly, where you had 2 separate grizzly attacks by 2 different bears on 2 different people that killed them. And that's quite a well-known one. This story from 1970 about this hiking club is remarkable, because they seem to get away twice, and it chases them down.
Hiking club, and it wasn't a big bear, not like the one in the story we just mentioned, which was it was underweight, but it was a huge bear. This was quite a small one. It was a sub-adult, and for some reason, it just went berserk, and it chased and pursued these hikers on the mountain, and some of them got away, but several of them were caught and killed by it. And that is virtually unknown outside of Japan.
Yeah. I mean, there's a brilliant sentence in that at the beginning of it where they'd had the first encounter, Rich, and you've written, the group had all come away from southern Japan, and they would be damned if they were going to let a small bear stop them from striking their goal.
Yeah, they wanted to go up the mountain. Because it was a small bear, and they frightened it away by banging pots and pans. They thought, oh, that's it, it's gone now. But it killed 3 of them. Killed 3 of the party, and it was no bigger than a large dog, but it really was out to get them. Now, whether that was predatory, I mean, it did eat what it killed, so it was probably hungry, but there may have been an element of territory in there as well.
I suppose the saddest part of this story, on top of the students that sadly died, this was clearly a very strange situation, Richard, because I think one of them, when they were trying to escape, met another group of hikers who the bear had also tried to attack, and they were trying to get off. So there was clearly something going on here, Rich. But there's one bit towards the end where you're on about the group had all split up and everybody was running everywhere and whatever, and one of them had got stuck. He wrote a diary.
He wrote a journal. Yeah. I can't sleep. The slightest sound of wind rustling of the grass scares me. I hope rescue is coming soon. The sun is coming up, but I think I'll stay inside the tent until it gets a bit brighter. Oh my God, the bear is outside. Have the other members made it off the mountain? When is rescue coming? I'm afraid. The fog is getting thicker. Yeah, and it got him. It got into the tent and killed him.
I mean, following on from this, because every time you think this story can't get any more heartbreaking or incredible, the final 3 are trying to escape, and it comes back again, and one of the team that's left fights the bear so the other 2 can escape and dies protecting the other 2, which is an act of selflessness that you can only imagine, Richard, that someone would put themselves in such a situation. You can't imagine how those other 2 people must feel to know that 3 of their friends have all died within several hours of each other. As they said, by just a very small bear. It's incredible.
It shows you what they can do, even a small one, the strength of them.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
Well, it's one of those things when you occasionally see these strange things where they, on the internet sometimes, when they'll say, can this creature fight this creature? And one of the weird things we know about bears is that they used to be used for entertainment in the new frontier of the United States, Richard. And there are reports of bears being essentially put into some kind of gladiatorial combat with all kinds of creatures, and they just literally make mincemeat out of everything.
Yeah, they killed lions. In the wild, they killed the big Siberian, or a sort of brown bear kills tigers, kills Siberian tiger.
It just shows the power they hold. I think this is one of the aspects, because we look at bears and we see things like pandas, and the spectacled bear, and the sun bear and things. They've got this beautiful, cute nature about them, and I mean, bears are beautiful, beautiful creatures. And as you say, we've got this cross breeding that started because obviously there's been a couple of what some people have rather unimaginatively titled Pisleys, Richard, which is one of those names that I think could do with changing. I think.
I mean, I knew someone was living in Slough or somewhere. Oh, well, we're the Pisleys. We live at number 13.
Some 60s beat combo, Richard.
Yeah.
Trying to rival the monkeys, perhaps. I mean, when we're talking about these attacks in Japan and other bear attacks, often, as you say, one of them, they'd got rid of the deer population. I know some people have said it's often due to a wet summer where perhaps there's not as many berries around as things, because as you say, bears are omnivores. They will eat anything really to get by, and it's usually a last resort when they resort to attacking people, Richard, regardless, because at the end of the day, if they wanted to eat people all day, bears, they could easily chase down anybody and finish them off quite easily, because this is the other aspect of bears. They are incredibly fast.
All for their size, immensely fast, yeah. And fast swimmers and fast climbers as well.
Yeah. Yes. I know, going back to my viewing habits of the past, Richard, I remember watching a documentary about bears, and I remember one, and it was talking about black bears, because obviously in North America, black bears are kind of considered as the ones who are a little bit skittish and are easier to get rid of. And I remember there was a report about a lady who had gone jogging somewhere in the States, and she'd always been advised, if you ever come across a black bear and it won't go away by making noise or whatever, climb a tree, because bears can't climb trees. And I thought, who's told her that? Because this was awful, because she obviously climbed the tree to get away with it. The bear climbed up, pulled her down, ate her.
Yeah, well, the black bears do eat people. You're more likely to meet a black bear than you are to meet a brown bear in North America, because brown bears are, only up in the upper states. And there's a long list in the book of people who've been eaten by black bears.
Yeah.
They're not as aggressive, but because people run into them more, you occasionally get these fatal predatory attacks. It's funny because in some areas bears attack people and in some they don't. For example, Tajikistan, which I've visited a couple of times, and I'll back there looking for the Caspian tiger in a few weeks. That has a healthy bear population. Only one person has ever been killed by a bear in Tajikistan. They seem to differ from place to place.
It is peculiar. I know I was recently reading about that there seems to be a spate of attacks in Romania at the minute, Richard.
Yeah.
Because obviously in Europe, bears are now protected everywhere, as is the wolf. Yeah. And as creatures will do when they're not being persecuted for just being alive often, they will rebound incredibly well. And so now, this is one of those things that I think people are not researching where they're going, or they just presume everything's fine, and they're going to these forests in Europe expecting everything to be okay. And I don't think they're expecting to come across a bear, because they're so unused to it, how much these populations have rebounded in the last 30 years since protection was introduced. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. But once again, you've got to remember that, generally these things aren't out to get you. Usually they don't look on people as prey. No. These things happen very rarely. Out of all the animals we've talked about, the only two really that look on humans as prey on a regular basis is the Nile crocodile and the saltwater crocodile. Others occasionally kill people.
Yeah. I mean, the other, like we say, there are lots of things that humans have done that have consequences that aren't obvious, I think, Richard. When we talk about bear attacks, it's often that people are leaving litter or are thinking that, well, if I feed these bears, they'll become my friends and we can all go live in the wood like Snow White. They've got this sort of romantic idea about animals, Richard, I think, which is great and lovely, and we should always respect living creatures. But you've got to remember, at the end of the day, it'll turn. You're not going to suddenly make friends with a wild bear in the woods, just by giving it a Twinkie bar or a donut, Richard. These things are they're just going to come back. And it's like you say in the book, it's not a big leap to go from being fed to feeding on the feeder.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Night of the Grizzlies earlier on. And with that case, it was found out that there was a hotel that was just dumping all their food waste outside, and the bears were coming to eat it. And they did it so that people at the hotel could see the bears. And that's why the bears lost their fear of human beings.
Yeah. Well, what's the worst that could happen here, Richard?
While we're on the subject of bears, might be a slight digression, but Bigfoot and Yeti are not bears. Absolutely not bears. This is something that really gets up my nose. I listened to a very good podcast called Uncanny by Danny Roberts.
This explanation has become legendary, despite the fact it's only been aired about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Richard, I've seen so many people laughing at the explanation that was given here.
And there's a very good case of some Native Americans who were seasoned bear hunters up in Alaska that got attacked by a group of Sasquatch who were hurling rocks at their shack. And then the skeptic, who was a folklorist, didn't know the first thing about natural history, was saying, oh yes, these were probably bears. Bears have been known to throw rocks. No, they haven't. They'll flip rocks. They don't throw them. In order to throw, you have to grip. You have to have an opposable thumb. And the Yeti and the Sasquatch have been known to hurl rocks and kill animals as large as yak by hurling rocks. Swing clubs. They walk upon their hind legs all the time, not like bears. They have the shoulder blades, the scapula, are outward facing, giving them broad shoulders, not like the sloping shoulders of a bear when it stands on its hind legs, because the scapula are against the side of the body in the same way that all quadrupeds are, like dogs, for instance. Then you've got the long dog-like snout, which the Yeti and the Sasquatch don't have. They have flat, gorilla-like faces. And bears have ears up on top of their heads, not the side of the heads, like Yeti and Sasquatch. So it's like smashing a square pin into a round hole. It just doesn't fit. And it just shows the idiocy of skeptics, the absolute rank stupidity of them, that they will gobble up any ridiculous explanation rather than consider that there might be an unknown species of relic hominin.
And also, Richard, it shows, for me, when you tell an experienced bear hunter of Native American descent that he doesn't know what he's looking at, I find that deeply offensive, personally.
Do I? It makes me very angry. Also, the similar thing over in Asia. People will get angry if you suggest what they saw was a bear. They say, no, we know what a bear looks like. It wasn't a bear that we saw. When I was looking for the Yeti in the Garo Hills in northern India, all of them said, none of them said it looked anything like a bear. They said it looked like a gorilla standing on its hind legs, long black fur, 3 meters tall, standing erect, and it was like a gorilla on its hind legs or a huge man covered with hair, not a bear.
Yeah. I mean, most people would know. I mean, the thing about claiming that bears pick things up and throw them is a remarkable leap of nonsense, because it's only in recent times that they've discovered that bears use rocks as tools, Richard, but they don't pick them up and hold them. They basically put them in the palm of their head and use them as like a loof, don't they? Or to give themselves a sort of cleansing massage, or to scratch irritation or infections.
They can grip between the paws and sort of flick them, but they can't hurl them.
No.
Also, to hurl, you have to rotate the arm, which bears can't do. They can't rotate the arm all the way around because they're quadrupeds. It's physically impossible. So, I mean, if you saw a bear standing on its hind legs at a distance or briefly in the half light or something, yes, you might mistake it for a Sasquatch or a Yeti, but a good, clear view by someone who's a bear hunter, who they're large, and then some armchair idiot comes along and says, "Oh no, they were seeing bears. It was bears throwing rocks." Well, I've just been researching bear attacks from all over the world, and I can tell you there's not a single one of them where a bunch of bears clammed together in a group and attacked humans by hurling rocks at them.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes because if you could prove that, Richard, that's groundbreaking, isn't it? That would be one of the most important biological discoveries of the 21st century. And yet someone's just said it just because they can't explain this person's experience.
Yeah.
Ludicrous.
It's ludicrous. Insanity.
I mean, with bears as well, I suppose the one thing that I've always found very interesting about North America's bear situation is that obviously you've got Alaska, and essentially you've got all three major species in North America that are all around there, Richard. For me, I find it incredible that there aren't more attacks because of this encroachment that's coming. And you see some of the footage that comes out of these particular places sometimes. I remember Jeremy Wade was up there once, and they had sentries all over the place. I think he was after salmon. And so they had to be very careful, because obviously it wasn't just Jeremy Wade who was after some lovely salmon. There was lots and lots of bears that were coming up for the spawning. And to have these three species all sort of congregating around each other, and as we've said earlier on, they're breeding, so there's clearly not too much conflict going on here. As with anything, if there's enough food, everybody gets on very well, as we see in most species, from spiders to bears to large cats. If there's enough food to go around, everybody's happy, and they're all fine and dandy. And so you would be unsurprised, I suspect, especially in Alaska, because it's often put forward as this place where thousands of people disappear every year. You have this kind of environment where it's rough, it's rugged, it's barren. When the weather changes, you aren't going anywhere for days sometimes. I would not be surprised, Richard, if we discover 20, 30 years down the line that there are certain areas of Alaska where there are massive boneyards of victims that have unfortunately been plucked walking home from the pub or whatever.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, Richard, thank you for joining me today and terrifying us all with some of these incredible stories. It's a brilliant book, regardless of your thoughts on the title, primarily because, as we were talking about some of these cases from Japan and around the world, there are stories and experiences, first-hand accounts in here that I think people would never have stumbled across, Richard, regardless. And therefore, it's a brilliant collection. I mean, the second one sounds even more exciting, as you referred to earlier on about the woman-eating elephant. Woman-eating elephant of World War II. Now, that's a documentary show in itself, Richard, never mind anything else.
Well, Volume 2 is going to be out either the end of this year or the start of next year, and Volume 2 covers big cats, tigers, lions, leopards, jaguars, wild dogs, coyotes, dingoes, hyenas, just like baboons and chimps and giant squid. And then it goes on to parasites, the things that feed on our flesh that are tiny, and oftentimes the most dangerous of them all.
Yes, they are. It's brilliant. Another excellent volume in your continuing career, Richard. Where can everybody get hold of a copy of this? And tell us about the other book that's currently out as well, that hopefully you'll be coming back later in the year to tell us all about as well.
Yes. Well, you can order it online. Just go onto Amazon and just type in Creatures That Eat People, that dreadful title that I have nothing to do with and I will not be blamed for. Or you could order it from any good bookshop, or probably any crap bookshop. But yeah, you can get it online. My other book, which is out now and which I'll be sending you a review copy of very soon, is called The Highest Strangeness. And it's about very high strangeness Fortean cases. Now, Forteana in itself is strange. There's nothing everyday or normal about seeing a sea serpent or a UFO or a ghost or experiencing a rain of frogs or fish or something like that. But these are cases that are so absolutely unhinged and bizarre that no one would ever make them up.
Yes.
If you were going to hoax something or make up a story, you'd want to make it believable. These are absolutely insane. And they include things like the mince pie Martians, modern-day dragon sightings and dragon worship cults, the Irish water rhino, the Elvis Presley and Jarrow, the big gay rapist hippo man, the talking cat with human eyes that saved children from a paedophile, the ghost of a tree that haunted a former Doctor Who actor, the giant ghost crab of South Africa, robot beer cans, robot flowers. That's just the tip of the iceberg, the very tiny tip of the iceberg. I had more fun writing this book than I have writing a book for years because it was just so bloody bonkers. Dancing cows, fairies stealing people's shadows.
Yes.
All sorts of weird stuff. And what it's in 4 chapters: monsters, ghosts, UFOs, miscellaneous, and then trying to make some sort of sense out of it, trying to find common threads in it. I couldn't possibly include every case in it because you'd have a series of books then, like Richard Corliss's Source Book series, would be way too big. And I'm not trying to make a Unit 40 because I don't think there is one. It is multi-Unit 40 phenomenon. But what I'm trying to do is to suggest what might be happening in some cases. And the important words are might and some there. But if you want to read about some cases that will just leave you scratching your head, Bigfoots and Yowies haunting houses like ghosts and turning up in the middle of poltergeist outbreaks, unbelievably weird stuff.
Absolutely.
And then just something in Sheffield as well. There's a Spring Heel Jack.
Yes.
We associate him with Victorian London, but he was seen in the 70s in Sheffield.
Yes.
Cornered in a factory and then vanished like a ghost.
Yes. I remember doing a talk many years ago, Richard, when I went back to Sheffield College as a mature student, do my A-levels, and we had to do a presentation, and I did a presentation on Fortiana in Sheffield, and I covered the Attercliffe Spring-Heeled Jack incident, and one of the ladies in my class burst into tears because she was one of the witnesses.
Wow.
She was a kid, and she was upstairs in their attic bedroom, and it was peering through the attic window at them, and that's why they called the police, and that's how the police came out, because it was their father that reported it, that they said there was a prowler with glowing eyes staring at his children through their bedroom window.
Now, if I recall correctly, I covered that in the book.
Yeah.
That story.
Yeah.
That very one.
Yeah.
What did you describe it as looking like?
She just said it was a black, shadowy shape. It looked like a man, but it just had blazing red eyes.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And she was amazed because she didn't know other people knew about it. And I was the first person outside of her family that had spoken about it. And she just said, I felt so much relief because now I realise it happened.
Oh, yeah. Whatever it was, it happened.
Yeah.
And we've got things like you know demonic black dogs or black shuck and Barchester. Yeah. Do you know the famous Yorkshire abduction P.C. Godfrey's?
Yes.
Did you know that when he was on the spaceship, as well as seeing a Christ-like figure and these little robots with light bulb type heads, he saw a black dog? Yeah. And there was another case of demonic black dogs seen coming out of a flying saucer in America. There's the case from Liverpool of a goblin that was killing people's pets' rabbits by smashing their heads in with a hammer.
Oh.
There's a poltergeist case from Runcorn where this thing manifests as a gigantic cloud with horns and it strangled pigs on a farm.
Yes, John Gaunt.
Oh, yes. A giant snake from a rural town in America in the closing years of the 19th century and the early years of the 20th century, where the whole town was haunted by this vast snake that would appear, anybody approaching it would be thrown over. And it was, people tried to shoot it and stab at it, and no one could make a mark on it. And it would coil around a school and then coil around private houses and all sorts of that. The space penguins, hauntings by Muppets, figures like, the Count from Sesame Street, turning up in a poltergeist haunting case, biting a girl's feet in the middle of the night. The Melting Man of Brazil, the poor guy in the 1950s in Brazil that saw like an earth light, a golden earth light that blasted him with a beam, and then it seemed to give him intense radiation poisoning, and literally his skin melted and fell off, and he died within one night.
Wow. The
Exorcism of Loch Ness, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And much, much, much more.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. Like I say, there's a lot of stories I knew a bit about.
Cool. I'll give you a talk on that. As soon as I send you off the review copy.
Hey, don't you worry about that. I'm looking forward to diving into that properly, Richard, with you. So listen, I just want to say thank you as always, my friend, for coming on to the show once again and supporting us and the listeners in regards to your continued excellent work. And I wish you the very best of luck with both your books that are currently out. And I look forward to when we talk about The High Strangers, because we won't be too long. And I wish you the very best. And we will speak very soon, Richard. Thank you as always.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Cheers. Bye-bye.